My name is Claire Weston. I'm 31 years old, and 7 years ago, the woman who hired me, mentored me, and called me her protege, stood in front of a boardroom full of people and told them I had fabricated data to save my own career. I was 24. I had just been nominated for the most prestigious research award in our field, and in the span of 10 minutes, she erased everything I had ever built. What I'm about to tell you is what happened after that, and why last spring, I sat in the front row of a black-tie industry gala and watched that same woman receive an award she had spent years convincing people I didn't deserve. What she didn't know was that I had been the one to arrange it. Let me take you back to where it started, because none of this makes sense without understanding who Renata Hale was, and more importantly, who she pretended to be. I graduated top of my class from the University of Michigan with a degree in biomedical research. I was 22, sharp, hungry, and completely naive about the way ambition could dress itself up in the language of mentorship. When I joined the Palmer Institute, a mid-sized but highly respected research organization in Boston, I thought I had made it. I was assigned to Dr. Renata Hale's lab. She was 50, brilliant, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made everyone sit up straighter. She had a TED Talk with 4 million views. She had a book. She had a way of making you feel, when her attention landed on you, like you were the most important mind in the building. She told me I was exceptional within my first week. "Claire," she said, closing her office door, leaning forward across her mahogany desk, "I don't say this lightly. You have the kind of analytical instinct I've been looking for in a junior researcher for years." I remember the way sunlight came through the blinds behind her and striped the floor in gold. I believed every word. For 2 years, I believed every word. I worked 18-hour days for Renata. I ran the clinical data analysis on a long-term study examining inflammatory markers in patients with autoimmune conditions, work that was genuinely groundbreaking, work that I poured everything into. When the results started coming together, Renata would sit beside me and go through the findings, asking questions, offering small refinements, looking over my shoulder. I thought she was mentoring me. I didn't realize she was cataloging my methods. The study was published. Renata's name was first on the paper. Mine was third, behind a colleague named Dwight, who had contributed a single methodology note 8 months earlier. I told myself that was how academia worked, that my turn would come. Then came the nomination for the Callaway Prize, one of the most respected awards for early career biomedical researchers in the country. When my department head, Dr. Ellison, told me I had been put forward, I cried in the bathroom afterward. I texted my mother. I called my college roommate. I went home and made the kind of dinner you make when something you have ached for actually arrives. Renata called me into her office the next morning. She was warm, effusive. "You deserve this," she said. "I'm going to write you the most glowing recommendation letter you've ever seen." She squeezed my hand across the desk. I left that meeting feeling invincible. 3 weeks later, everything collapsed. It started with a meeting I wasn't invited to. I noticed the calendar block because it included the entire senior leadership team, plus Renata, and the subject line simply read, "Data Integrity Concern, Weston Study." My name. My stomach went cold before I even knew why. I waited. 4 hours later, Dr. Ellison knocked on my office door and told me to come with her. Her face was the color of old paper. The conference room felt enormous. Renata sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression grave. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Around the table were 3 senior researchers, the Institute's legal counsel, and an external auditor I had never seen before. Dr. Ellison said, "Claire, there have been some concerns raised about anomalies in the data set from the autoimmune study." My mind went completely blank. Renata finally looked at me, and her eyes were so steady, so carefully composed, that I felt something drop inside my chest like a stone. "The variance corrections on the 3rd data cluster," she said quietly. "Someone adjusted those numbers after the initial review." The auditor opened his laptop, showed me a spreadsheet. The adjustments were attributed to my login credentials. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't made those changes. I knew I hadn't made those changes. My hands started to shake and I pressed them flat against my thighs under the table so no one could see. "I didn't alter any data," I said. My voice was completely even, which surprised even me. "Someone has accessed my account." Renata exhaled slowly, like she had been expecting me to say exactly that, and was disappointed by it. "Claire," she said, and the way she said my name, patient, pitying, like a teacher addressing a child who just won't stop, I felt it land like a slap. "I've gone back through the communication chain. I found emails." She slid a printout across the table. Emails from my address to a graduate student, discussing what she called smoothing the margins on the third cluster. I stared at them. I had never written those words. I had never sent those messages. What happened next took 48 hours and felt like 48 years. I was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. My Callaway Prize nomination was quietly withdrawn. The Institute issued a brief internal memo about upholding research integrity standards without using my name, which meant everyone knew it was about me, and had the added cruelty of leaving me with no official way to respond. My badge stopped working on the third day. Security walked me out with a cardboard box. I stood in the parking lot in February, in the kind of cold that gets inside your coat no matter how tightly you hold it, and I didn't understand how the world was still moving. Cars were pulling in and out. Someone's coffee was steaming in their hand. Everything was continuing, completely indifferent to the fact that my entire professional identity had just been dismantled in a conference room by a woman I had trusted with every ambitious thought I'd ever had. Renata had done it cleanly. She had used my login. She had fabricated emails. She had been the one who raised the concern, framed as a reluctant discovery, the mentor heartbroken to report a protégé's misconduct. She had timed it perfectly, just as the Callaway nomination would have put a spotlight on the study's findings. On my findings. I learned later, from a colleague who sent me a private message 6 months after I left, that a modified version of my methodology had appeared in a new study Renata published with a graduate student named Brett. The key analytical framework I had spent 18 months building. Presented as a collaborative development between Renata and Brett. My name did not appear anywhere. That winter was the hardest of my life. I moved back to Michigan, into my parents' spare room, and I spent 3 weeks barely leaving the house. The biomedical research community was small enough that word had spread, softened and distorted as it traveled, but unmistakably pointing in my direction. I applied for positions at 2 other institutes, got 1 call back. The interview went well until the final round, when the hiring manager asked diplomatically if I could speak to the situation at Palmer. I withdrew my application the next day. I didn't know how to explain what had happened without sounding unhinged, without sounding like exactly what Renata had framed me as, a young researcher who got caught and was now blaming her mentor. Renata had thought of everything. She had been doing this for years. She was very good at it. What saved me was a person I almost didn't contact. Her name was Dr. Sandra Okafor, and she was a research methodology professor at the University of Michigan, who had briefly served on the Callaway Prize Committee. She had been my undergraduate thesis advisor. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, and I only reached out because I was desperate, and she was one of the few people in the field I trusted completely. I sent her a long, embarrassing email at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in March. I laid out everything. The emails I hadn't written, the data changes attributed to my login, the timing of the accusation, the methodology that had appeared in Renata's subsequent study. I told her I didn't expect her to believe me. I just needed to tell someone who might understand the technical specifics well enough to recognize what had actually happened. She called me the next morning at 7 a.m. "I believe you," she said. No preamble, no throat clearing, just those 3 words. "And I want you to listen to me carefully, because what you just described is a pattern." I have heard parts of this story before, in fragments, from 2 other researchers who crossed paths with Renata Hale and came out the other side with their reputations damaged and no way to prove why. She paused. "Tell me everything you still have." What I had was not nothing. I had the original data files on a personal hard drive I had backed up out of habit before my badge stopped working. I had time-stamped lab notes in my own handwriting. I had a chain of text messages with a colleague named Priya, who had been present during several key analytical sessions and who had watched me build the methodology from the ground up. And I had one more thing that Sandra considered quietly for a long moment before she said, "That might be enough." What I had was a version of the third data cluster, analysis I had sent to my personal email before the anomalies were supposedly introduced, 4 days before. the date the auditor's report identified as the point of alteration. My own analysis, time-stamped, unaltered, sitting in my personal inbox like a sealed envelope. Sandra told me to stay quiet and stay patient and let her make some calls. I moved back to Boston, got a job doing data analysis for a health insurance company, work that was honest and careful and completely removed from research, and I waited. Sandra was systematic in a way that reminded me why I had loved working with her as an undergraduate. She reached out to the 2 other researchers. She gathered their accounts. She went back through Renata's publication history with the kind of forensic attention that academic misconduct investigations should have applied, and hadn't. 14 months after I left the Palmer Institute, Sandra had enough. She brought what she had assembled to the editor of the Journal of Biomedical Integrity, where she served on the advisory board. She brought it to the Callaway Prize Committee, 2 of whose members had long-standing relationships with Palmer's institutional donors. She brought it to a science journalist at a national publication who had been investigating credential laundering in academic research for 2 years and was looking for a case she could substantiate completely. Renata, meanwhile, had continued ascending. She was appointed to a national advisory panel on research standards, an irony so precise it felt constructed. She gave a keynote at the annual Biomedical Innovation Conference in Chicago. She was photographed at galas, quoted in journals, invited to serve on ethics committees. She had spent 2 years building an even more prominent platform, and she had done it standing on what she had taken from me, the gala I mentioned, the one where she was set to receive the Lifetime Contribution award from the National Biomedical Research Foundation, right, was May, scheduled for April. The same month, Sandra's investigation was delivered simultaneously to Palmer's board of directors, the journal editor, the Callaway Committee, and the journalist, whose piece ran online the morning of the gala. I had spent 6 months quietly cooperating with the journalist, providing my documentation, connecting her with Priya and with the other researchers Sandra had identified. I had agreed to be named in the article. I had sat in my apartment at night reading back through everything, making sure every word I provided was precise, verified, and fair. I was not trying to destroy Renata Hale. I was trying to tell the truth loudly enough that it could not be managed away. The morning the piece ran, I was already in Chicago. Sandra had arranged for me to attend the gala as her guest, in a professional capacity. I was being recognized alongside 3 other researchers as a recipient of a small but meaningful grant from the Foundation for Early Career Scientists who had demonstrated resilience in the field. My name was in the program. Page 6, small print. Renata wouldn't have looked. The article hit at 7 in the morning. By noon, it had been shared 3,000 times within academic research circles. By the time the gala doors opened at 6 p.m., the Foundation's board had held an emergency call. By the time guests were sitting down to dinner, Renata's name had been removed from the award recipient list and replaced with a brief statement about ongoing review. She was still in the room. She had arrived not knowing, or perhaps knowing and believing she could weather it, the way she had weathered everything else. I watched her face when the Foundation president took the podium and announced the change. I was 3 tables away, far enough to be discreet, close enough to see the exact moment her composure broke. It was a small crack. Nothing that the people at her table probably noticed. Just a tightening around her eyes. A stillness in her hands that had been reaching for her water glass and stopped. She recovered quickly. She was practiced at that. But everyone with a phone had read the article. When my name was called as a grant recipient, I walked to the podium in a room that had already been quietly, irrevocably turned. I shook the Foundation president's hand. I said thank you. I looked out at those tables and kept my face composed and warm because the point had never been humiliation. The point had been truth, and truth had already done its work before I ever set foot in that building. Renata left before dessert. I heard the following week that she had requested a leave of absence from Palmer to address what her publicist called unfounded professional allegations. The leave became a resignation 4 months later. The Journal of Biomedical Integrity retracted 2 of her papers pending investigation. Her national advisory panel position was quietly not renewed. The Callaway Committee issued a statement acknowledging that a previous nomination had been withdrawn under circumstances they were now re-examining. They invited me to reapply. I did. I won. Priya called me the morning I found out, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Sandra cried, which I had not expected, and which made me cry immediately in response. My mother took the day off work and drove to my apartment and made me lunch and sat across the table from me while I held the notification letter and felt something I hadn't felt in years, a clean, uncomplicated pride. I accepted a position at a research institute in Philadelphia, a smaller place than Palmer, but one with the kind of culture I understood now how to recognize. My department head had read the article and then read my work, and then read the article again. She called me directly. "We'd like to build something here," she said, "and I want to build it with people who know what integrity actually costs." The data methodology I had developed, the one that had appeared, stripped of my name, in Renata's subsequent study, was formally credited to me in a published correction the journal issued after the investigation concluded. It was a small paragraph in an academic journal. It was also, in the specific world of biomedical research, an unmistakable restoration. I think about the parking lot sometimes. February, cardboard box, cars moving past me like nothing had ended. I think about the 11 p.m. email I almost didn't send because I was ashamed and exhausted and afraid of what Sandra might think of me. I think about the 14 months I spent doing insurance data analysis and coming home to my laptop and staying meticulous and quiet while the truth slowly, stubbornly assembled itself into something that could not be argued away. People ask me if I feel vindicated. The word doesn't quite fit. Vindication implies I needed the outside world to confirm something I had always known. What I feel is more specific than that. I feel the precise satisfaction of having done the work correctly, of having been patient when patience felt impossible, of having trusted the evidence when trusting felt insane. I feel the satisfaction of having told the truth, even when the truth was not fast or loud or immediately believed. Renata thought she had taken everything from me. She had, for a time, but she had also, without intending to, given me a reason to become someone who understood exactly how systems could be used to bury a person, and exactly how they could be used to surface one. I spoke at a conference last fall on research ethics and data integrity. Afterward, a young woman came up to me, 23 years old, first-year research assistant, and she told me that her supervisor had presented her analysis at a departmental meeting without crediting her. She looked the way I had looked in that parking lot, like someone who had been made to doubt the very solid ground she was standing on. I took her card. I gave her mine. I told her to document everything, to trust herself, and to find one person who would read her emails at 11 p.m. and call her back at 7 a.m. the next morning. I told her the truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't always move as fast as the lie, but it is heavier, and when it lands, it stays. Sandra Okafor is still at Michigan. I call her every few weeks, not because I need guidance anymore, but because she is one of the people I would trust with anything, and those people deserve to hear from you regularly. She spent nearly a year of her professional life making quiet, meticulous, largely uncelebrated phone calls on behalf of 3 researchers she believed. Nobody wrote a story about that part, but it was the whole foundation of everything that followed, and I carry that with me every day. My name is Claire Weston. I am 31 years old. I was told at 24 that I had manufactured the most important work of my life. I did not. I have the timestamps to prove it, and I have the award on my wall, and I have the correction in the journal, and I have something rarer than any of those things, the unshakable knowledge that when everything was taken from me, I did not take the same things back. I took only what had always been mine. I proved that the truth, handled with patience and precision, and the right people beside you, does not need to be louder than the lie. It only needs to be more durable. And I am still here. That is the entire proof.